Hey, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. The Inmate Alliance welcomes you to the Insider, where I give you the truth about the federal prison system, whether you want to hear it or not. So, here goes. I'm here to tell you what those behind the wall need to know every day to survive in the system and to enlighten those outside the walls with the truth. You know, folks, it's just some of the things I talk about. You just cannot make this stuff up. So if you're an inmate, former inmate, family member, loved one, or just a friend, buckle up, stay tuned for the truth from one who's been there and really knows what it's like. I'm your host, the one they called the old guy. So let's get into it here. Now, imagine this. Some of you will just boggle your mind. The BOP has a backlog of some 4,500 pending cases involving employee misconduct. 4,500 cases. Now, I understand it was far more than that, and they're reducing it, but still, 4,500 cases involving employee misconduct. If this were an inmate, I assure you the punishment would be quick trip to the SHU. For those of you who don't know what that is, that's a special housing unit, solitary confinement. That's where you get punished. No ifs, ands, or buts. You're guilty without even a sniff of due process. But if you're a BOP employee, well, they'll get to you sometime or another. And they're so understaffed that they're really in no hurry to facilitate a hearing on the misconduct. You know, and this scenario goes to the root cause of all the Bureau's problems. And this is like the tail wagging the dog. You can decertify the CO's union all you want to, but the truth is something completely different. Until Director Mitchell gets control of the agency, things will never change. And the odds of him getting control of this agency with the bureaucracy that continues to be entrenched is slim and none. Now, the Bureau must hire corrections officers who want to be there and who have the mental acuity to prosper in the job. Those are mentally stable people who have been properly assessed by mental health professionals and professionally trained. Oh, and this is critical to getting the right people. You have to pay them a competitive wage. So how does Director Mitchell find the money to pay staff a good wage? By reducing the inmate population. And I've touched on this ad nauseum. Let me review quickly. I don't want to bore anybody with the details, but there are 8,000 veterans currently in the federal prison system who really need to get transferred to the Veterans Administrative VA hospital that is equipped with the mental health resources to help them. The BOP, federal prison system, is absolutely the worst place for them due to a virtually non-existent mental health staff. It's also estimated there are upwards of 20,000 non-citizens currently incarcerated in federal prisons, who I think most of whom would want to be sent back to their home countries. Maybe they don't, but they ought to be because they're here illegally. The largest number of incarcerated individuals available for release are the minimum to low-risk prisoners who are eligible for release to home confinement or halfway houses. The only problem is the inability of the BOP to calculate Second Chance and First Step Act time credits. Now, you mean to tell me that the BOP is unable to hire a 20-year-old programmer capable of building a simple algorithm, capable of calculating these credits? I guarantee you that person is out there. Let's see, these are currently being calculated somewhere in Texas. Well, put in a phone call to the computer programming department at Rice University. I think you'll probably find the person you need, in probably the first 15 seconds that you're inquiring. You know, and their explanation for this is totally disingenuous in that they're calculating those credits by hand. Folks, I know the Bureau is using an archaic program, but my goodness, you tell me you cannot find someone who can who can fix this and make this an electronic calculation. You know, it's absolutely incredible. You know, and solutions just seem to escape those people. The answer, in most cases, is just sitting right in front of them. Apparently, none of them can see the forest through the trees. It must be a case of bureaucratitis, you know, a failure to see the obvious. And it doesn't make any difference what iteration of bureaucrat you are. They all seem to be afflicted with the same thing. And the other thing, most of the BOP facilities are in horrible state of disrepair. I've often commented on the toxic black mold in the living quarters and the chow hall, leaky roofs, broken plumbing, clogged heat vents that spew dust every time they come on, electrical panels no one wants to touch, food insecurity, absolutely horrific food, and the kickers are virtually non-existent medical and mental health resources. They would rather see an inmate die or suffer from untreated medical conditions. And that's something I'm going to get into here in just a little bit. I remember an AUSA telling a judge that the let me dump this call. All right, I'm sorry, I left my ringer on my phone. I remember telling an AUSA telling the judge in my case that the medical care at the federal prison facilities was very good. Can you imagine that? That the BOP was more than able to incompetent to treat my active cancer and diabetes. I think it would have been poetic justice for the judge and AUSA to spend some time in a federal lockup and see for themselves just how poor the conditions are. Maybe they would think twice about sending sick and or elderly first-time nonviolent offenders to a federal prison system when home confinement would do the trick, and the costs are substantially less. And the next item is incredibly important to the inmate population. Scott, listen up, buddy. The Supreme Court heard oral arguments in a case that most would think makes Melba toast exciting by comparison, or watching the grass grow. But it's a sleeper, the question of boring civil procedure that has major importance to federal inmates seeking to hold the Bureau of Prison accountable for health care malpractice. Did you hear that? So guys like Scott and myself and a guy we called Face and Cisco and a bunch of others who had chronic conditions that the BOP's crack medical staff just absolutely butchered. You know, Face lost an eye to cancer because he didn't seek treatment. They didn't get treatment for him soon enough. Scott needed to go get his platelets checked on a recurring basis because his body just wasn't making them. So they let him sit there and get weaker and weaker and weaker. And now he's paying the price for that. Or any number, Cisco, who needed a bilirubin on every month and never got it. I mean, it's just, what's the matter with these people? So when a prisoner receives negligent health care, many start planning to bring an Eighth Amendment claim for deliberate indifference for serious medical needs. However, providing that heavy-handed medical care that was inflicted deliberately is hard to prove. Add to that the fact that since the Supreme Court's Egbert versus Boulay decision in 2022, bringing any federal constitutional claim seeking money damages, a so-called Bivens actions, is just about impossible. It's impossible and unnecessary because healthcare negligence is medical malpractice. And medical malpractice is negligence. And it goes on all the time, all day, every day. In my particular case, they confiscated my meds that I had refilled and brought in for my diabetes. And it was several days before I got my medicines replaced, and then they changed them all to medications that I had tried in the past that had a serious side effect on me, and that it was causing undue harm. But they didn't care because, they just didn't stock the stuff I had. So a prisoner can easily bring a negligence action against federal officers or employees under the Federal Tort Claims Act. Proving negligence is much easier than proving deliberate indifference. And face it, most of the lousy health care in the BOP system is the result of negligence rather than a deliberate design to inflict cruelty on inmates. When you pay medical staff less than the going rate, you get the worst of the worst, and that's exactly what the federal prison system gets. There's a catch, however. When a prisoner brings a malpractice suit, he or she must do it in the state where the negligence occurred. The suit is judged according to state malpractice law, although it is brought into federal court. And most states have rules or statutes that require the plaintiff bringing the lawsuit to accompany his or her complaint with an affidavit from an expert that sets out standard of care in the state and the expert's belief that the defendant BOP doctor or nurse failed to live up to it. The fact of the matter is that they routinely send federal prisoners out of state. I'm an Ohio resident, sent me to Kentucky. It's a cruel system. And the malpractice rules in Kentucky they're archaic at best. And these affidavits are called affidavits of merit, and they are required in order to discourage frivolous lawsuits. They're tough for inmates, however, even those with strong cases, because no expert is going to provide such an affidavit unless they're hired. And they're expensive, and most inmates just don't have that kind of money laying around. Because when you get convicted, you lose everything. So this is a double-edged sword. So we screw you here and we screw you there. So, whoops, sorry about your luck. The Affidavit of Merit rule has wiped out thousands of inmate FTCA suits over the years, including mine. Federal Tort Claims Act for deliberate indifference, making it impossible to get past the complaint stage to where you can engage in discovery and maybe obtain a settlement. The law requires applying federal rules of procedure, but state laws governing the substantive issue of whether malpractice has occurred. So, boys, you're darned if you do and darned if you don't. You're going to get it regardless. So there's a case called Erie Railroad Company versus Tompkins, which is a landmark Supreme Court decision which the court held that the United States does not have a general federal common law. Instead, while federal courts may follow federal procedural rules such as the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, they must apply state substantive law, not federal law, to lawsuits that do not involve federal questions. I don't know how this cannot involve a federal question when it's a violation of the Eighth Amendment. Anyways, most American lawyers and legal scholars agree Erie is one of the most important decisions in U.S. Supreme Court history. A decision has been described as going to the heart of the American system of federalism. The issue of whether state laws requiring an affidavit of merit with a medical malpractice complaint are substantive or procedural has now reached the Supreme Court. This is the key, boys and girls. This is the key. Last Monday, a week or so ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, the court heard arguments in Burke versus Choi. A case that asked whether the Delaware State Affidavit of Merit requirement is a procedural requirement, in which case it does not apply in a federal court FTCA suit, or a substantive requirement that federal courts have to honor. That's very important on this issue. At the argument, some of the justices viewed the requirements as unacceptably hostile to the central concept of the federal trial system. According to the SCOTUS blog Judge Elena Kagan led that group, drawing on a big picture conception of the federal rules of civil procedure, doubtless influenced by her decades teaching about the subject as a professor. For Kagan, the Delaware rule flies in the face of the entire thrust of the federal rules, which were meant to establish a notice pleading system where all you had to do was say, here I am, here's my claim, I'm going to be seeking damages, the end. And everything else was supposed to happen later in the normal course of things. Judge Jackson, for example, saw Delaware's rule as hostile to the federal system. She said, we have this Delaware law saying what is necessary to file or initiate a malpractice lawsuit as a matter of procedure. You have to have this separate affidavit. Notably, it's not evidence. It's just what is necessary to to initiate this lawsuit. And under federal law, no such thing is required. Federal law says that the action commences by filing a complaint with the court. So Justice Sotomayor pointed to the requirement for filing an answer to the complaint. The federal rules require that an answer be served in 20 days. The Delaware rule says the answer doesn't have to be served until the affidavit has been filed. So we have definite conflicts, and I always thought federal law superseded state law. And yet you have to have this stupid affidavit in order to file, which is way out of the wheelhouse of most prison inmates. Now, the defendant hospital argued that the court shouldn't focus on details like those cited by Jackson and Sotomayor, contending that there was no reason that a federal court must ignore the entirety of a state statute if any part of it might conflict with a federal rule in some cases. Several justices recognized that such an approach would ask SCOTUS to pick and choose among various pieces of the Delaware statute. Justice Neil Gorsuch said, you're cracking and extracting some things from the Delaware rule that you would apply in federal court and other things that you wouldn't. We're creating this Frankenstein of a statute, right? We're taking bits and pieces and adopting it. But what authority does the federal court have to rewrite Delaware law in that fashion? Well, you're two different court systems. I'm just a dumb guy, but you got federal court and state court. Federal court supersedes the state. So why would you be required to file an affidavit of a state statute to apply in federal court? The feds got their own stuff. So SCOTUS blog writer Ronald Mann said that it was difficult to determine from the argument how the court would rule. It's safe to say that several justices will reject Delaware's procedure and in most cases reject every other state's rule. And hard to believe that Kagan won't write something, but not at all clear what side the court as a whole will favor. Well, let's hope, boys and girls, that they make it a little easier for those of us who have been in the federal prison system and have suffered greatly at the hands of the medical staff to be able to file a malpractice suit. Scott and my friend Cheney, the nurse, who was not only incompetent but horribly, horribly harsh with federal prisoners, I think in whole or in part to his incompetence. I hope that you're on the receiving end of one of these things. A ruling invalidating the affidavit of merit requirement would be a major victory for FTCA filers in the federal prison system. So we'll keep our fingers crossed on this one. Mistreatment is so rampant in the federal correction system, and yet they hide behind a statute like this, continue to provide less than terrible care. I can tell you from personal experience, the government throws every imaginable roadblock up to protect themselves from total incompetence and sabotage. Now let's talk about a few other things that significantly impact this situation in the federal prisons. I think they forgot their mission, that not only to incarcerate people, but to rehabilitate the people that are there. You take everything from them, you put them in a prison, very little opportunity to make any kind of a living. You want them to be good people, and you send them back out in the street and with absolutely nothing, nowhere to start, and then say, oh, go be a good person, don't come back here. That's pretty hard, boys and girls. That's awful. That's hard to do. One of the problems, I touched on this, was reducing the prison population. That's terrific. You've got about 60,000 inmates who are minimum to low risk. A lot of them are elderly. What are they doing there at 60,000 a year to keep them there? Plus the cost of their medical care and treatment, which is over and above the 60 grand. Send them home. Let them go to work if they're still of working age, or retire, and let them use their own resources, their own health insurance to support themselves and to provide for their medical needs. I mean, you take 60,000 that are currently eligible, you put 8,000 guys who should be at the VA, and you take 20,000 illegal immigrants or immigrants that should be sent back to their home country. You're talking almost 90,000 people out of a population of 160,000. That leaves 70,000 people, which doesn't require anywhere near the kind of resources that it takes to incarcerate a population of that size. And then rehabilitate them. This is something that I keep pitching on, I keep preaching. You reduce the prison population, you can reduce the size of the staff, you can hire mentally competent, well-trained staff, you can hire medical professionals at the going rate. You're not going to get you're paying half the rate of the private sector, and what do you think you're going to get? You're going to get the dregs. I mean, seriously, you're going to get the worst of the worst. And that's exactly what happens. You get the worst of the worst. And so you got to screen them, you got to train them, you got to pay them. And then the size of staff can reflect the current population, which should be reduced to well under 100,000 prisoners. Then there's the issue of getting these guys out when they come out and finding good jobs, and how to get their facilities repaired. Now it's going on every week where I see something that the federal facilities are in just a horrible state of disrepair. I can personally attest to that, and anyone who's ever been in a federal prison can attest to that. I mean, they're just awful. Black mold, leaky pipes. I mean, I'm afraid to touch a electrical panel. I mean, it's a critical situation. The easiest thing to do, Director Mitchell, is to institute a training program for people interested in pursuing a career in the building trades when they leave. You got facilities that are in disrepair. You've got guys that would love to be a carpenter, electrician, a plumber, a pipe fitter, an HVAC guy. Every corner of this country has either a vocational high school or a 2-year community college that teaches the skills that these guys need. Make a deal with them. Get some instructors in. Get the guys that merit that have that are not disciplinary problems, that are moderate or minimum to low risk prisoners. and get them into the building trades program at the various prisons. First off, you get your facilities fixed for $1 an hour. You know, you teach the guys a trade. You put them out. When they get out, they're eligible or far more able to get a good paying job with a construction background and proper training and certification than they would just send him to a halfway house. They'd be a good boy. The other thing you can do is the food is woefully inadequate. I mean, it is absolutely horrible. And there's a significant issue of food insecurity. So how do you fix that? Well, those same community colleges, those same vocational schools, many of them have culinary programs. Why not hire an instructor with a culinary teaching background and put them in charge of the kitchens to teach the people not only how to learn a trade in the culinary arts, but also teach them how to prepare food, and the inmates come out good because they're getting fed well. They're getting fed decent, nutritious meals instead of the garbage that the BOP dictates. I mean, folks, I'm telling you, stuff's awful. And if you haven't been there, you've never been exposed to this thing, you cannot imagine. And you know, people think you make this stuff up, and I'm telling you, it's not being made up at all. You take a guy that's over 6 feet, 220, 240 pounds, and you give him one stinking little hamburger and say, go away and be a good boy, that's not going to feed anybody. Then you go buying junk from the commissary. That's a ripoff to start off with. That's full of carbos and sodium. I mean, it's a horrible situation. So, building trades, culinary arts. I mean, you're training a person to be able to go out and get a job after they're released. And all those places, all those building trades, all those food service companies and restaurants, they're all hurting for people that are properly trained that need a job. Hey, you send these guys out, and there's about 1,500 released every week into the general population, whether it's home confinement or halfway house. You send them home with a marketable skill. They can start working, start producing, start supporting their families. And I think that's what it's all about. And you get your buildings fixed. You make you get the inmates some decent food. I don't see what the problem is, except that the feds or most bureaucrats can't see the forest through the trees, and it's just a horrible situation. So there are solutions. They are not hard. They are right there in front of them. And if I could ever get Director Mitchell to listen to one of my shows, or call me and say, what do you think? Here's what I think. And I will tell you that from a skill perspective, many of the guys that I was with were executive caliber people who had been thrown under the bus by friends and business associates who shouldn't have been there in the first place. But talking about the decisions they make and the things that could be done, boys, you're missing the boat here. You are just totally missing the boat using the resources that you have. Well, it's coming about to the end of my show, and that's about it for the day, folks. I hope I brought some interesting things up, but I'm really, really anxious to see how the Supreme Court decision comes out, because I think I'm a day late and a dollar short, but there are some guys coming out of there that are subjected to this horrific medical care where it could make a difference, because the only way they're going to get the attention of these guys is to slap them right upside the head with a 2x4. So I want to express my sincere thanks to WBGU 88.1 FM here on the campus of Bowling Green State University for allowing me the time to express my opinions and rant for half an hour. And remember, unlike the brutal treatment we've received, be sure and treat each other's others with compassion, respect, and kindness. I would direct all of you to my website, www.inmatealliance.org, and where you can re-listen to this on a podcast, on Podbeam or YouTube. So we're trying to touch all the bases. I want to thank you all very much for listening, and I'm going to turn the music back on. See you again in 2 weeks.